Hello, everybody. I'm gonna mute you all, which I don't mean to be rude at all. Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is our live Oasis call for March, and we're gonna have our fabulous guest, Lisa Cron, in just a few moments. But first, we'll have a little settling in, and then we'll have a little celebration, and then we'll have some wonderful learning about Story Genius. So for those of you who are new to the platform, you can be on camera, which is fantastic because it makes this wonderful sense of community. But if you hate that, you can turn your computer off. You're all muted, so you don't have to worry about being noisy. If you want to ask a question when the time comes, you can use the chat box. So say hello in the chat box. How do you find the chat box? It only works if you're on the video platform. If you're on your phone listening in, you can't chat, but I try to read the chat as much as possible, and then we save it and publish it with the recording. So if somebody says something brilliant, you want to go back and find it. Hi, Judy. Yeah, so come and say hi in the chat box. You just click on that little thought bubble on the bottom of your video screen. If you're on your phone, you can unmute and ask a question with *2. And so if you have a question with that. I love seeing everybody on video. I know not everyone's comfortable with that. Some of you might be, I don't know, in the bathtub. But it's really fun. And if you just want to see Lisa and mine's face, up on the upper right-hand corner, you can do gallery view, and that gives you a little view of all the little people, or you can do speaker view, and you see one person speaking at a time. So just depends what you like. Hi, everybody. Welcome, new members. So happy that you're here. Let's see. Is there enough light on me? Can you all see me okay? Yeah. Hi, Lisa. I'll unmute you. Hi, welcome. We're gonna do our little celebration-y stuff for a few minutes, and then I'll bring you on with a rousing, oh my God, best writing book ever. Best writing book ever. I just reviewed that on Goodreads. I read it before, but I had somehow forgot to put it in my Goodreads. So I just wrote best writing book ever. And like so many people have come, and usually people don't comment on Goodreads. You know, it's less of a social media platform, at least for me, more of a place to keep track of what I read. Anyway, that review got like 3 responses. Yay. All right, I'll mute you. You do what you need. We'll be about 5-8 minutes.
I'm lurking.
You're lurking. Excellent. Excellent. I'll meet you though in case you want to lurk loud. All right, everybody. Yay. So welcome to so many new members. We have 142 new members. That's pretty exciting. And I feel so great about all the work I get to do in the world. I really do. I'm so lucky. It's just I'm so damn lucky. But this community, because we come together over time, because we're practiced together over time to show up for our lives, is such a deep, important part in my heart. So I'm just really grateful for those of you who show up and use this space however you want. There's so much good. If you use this space just to come to the live call once a month and celebrate and learn from our guests, yay. If you use it just occasionally dropping into the weekly audios, yay. If you use it just for the weekly audios and never or rarely show up on the forums or the Facebook group or the live calls, yay. The whole point of this community is to nurture what you want to make, the way you want to make it. And some of us, that's writing with a capital W, pretend that's my W right there. And for some of us, maybe it's writing just for ourselves. And in which case, you know, when we have our professional writing guests most month, you can just come to the beginning of the call and be like, hey, let's celebrate together. I want to see Jen's face. I want to see my fellow Oasis sisters' faces. And then you know, feel free to dial off at any time, stay as long as you can. And of course, the recording will be posted. And I actually now have my team set it up so it records automatically, so no more forgotten recordings. So thank you if anyone was reminding me. So just welcome everyone. I'm so excited to see all of you. And we'll jump in with our beginning of our time together here for just the next 3 or 4 minutes. I would love to hear in the chat box, what do you want to celebrate? Some of you had clear goals for the last month. Those of you who have been members for a while, things you really, really wanted to get done. Let's let's write them down in the beautiful checkbox, and I'm going to cry them out and celebrate them out for you. And for those of you who are new, maybe there's just something that you're like, I really want to have witnessed, I really want to have celebrated by the community. So we'll take about 5 minutes for that, and then I'll introduce Lisa and we'll get into some learning. And then at the end of the call, we'll say goodbye to Lisa and we'll spend 5 or 10 minutes thinking about and sharing, what do we want to set up for the next month in our writing, our painting, our creating, our health, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be writing. Okay, so Leah wants to celebrate a new creative job. Yay, 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 yay. That's amazing. I should not have worn a sweater. It's freezing outside. It's hot in my office. I'm going to be in a sweat in 5 minutes. Yeah, anybody else, what you want to celebrate? I want to celebrate letting go of 500 pages of my memoir with barely a tear and being amazed that I'm not devastated by that. And that a new book is going to rise from the ashes of it. I'm amazed by that. I am so proud of myself. So I'm going to celebrate that. Jody's been getting up early 2 days a week to do yoga. Yay! Oh, that's such a good feeling, isn't it? Yes, I love that. Teresa's been writing in her teeny tiny container almost every day for 2 weeks and enjoying the creative flow feeling. Yeah, get that mind and words flowing. That's fantastic. Thank you all for sharing the excitement with me. My memoir not working. I mean that. It's been so lovely to have a community that gets it. Judy's celebrating awareness of the inner Calvinistic, the trying to keep me on the fast road to burnout and getting off that road at least a little bit. That's huge, Judy. I so relate to that, like the cracking of the whip. Yay. Deb, I'm celebrating that I joined this group to find out why I was so bold to join this group. That's great. Welcome, Deb. That's great. I love it. May you find all the support and encouragement and resources that you need here. Antoinette, tiny containers became huge bogs of techno computer nightmares, celebrating that I let go of 6 years of hideous, stringent outlining of a sequel that could have sold a ton of money, and that tech nightmare at least got me into the studio. Celebrate not shooting my brains out. Yay! Yay for being here to fight another day. Yay for making it through those bogs of creativity and productivity and production. We've all been there. You know, I've been there a lot in the last 15 years in terms of books. I've had lots of successes in other ways, but the books certainly haven't worked. Serena, I've been moving my hands for at least 30 minutes in my art studio or free writing every day. Oh, I love that, moving your hand. Oh, thank you, Ella. Ella said she was so proud of me letting go of 4 years of writing. Yeah, me too. Me too. Jocelyn, celebrating joining this community. I've been craving a positive, powerful, and productive group. Oh, those are 3 good P's. Positive, powerful, and productive. I love that. And Rosella, I'm amazed at your memoir. Much appreciation. Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think that part of what is emerging from the memoir journey is that I've moved from being, my shorthand is fragile Jen, oh God, to really resilient Jen. And I think that's part of what the new book, this part of what the spine of the new book might be. We'll see. We'll see. I'm using this metaphor right now, which totally doesn't work, I think, for the big world, but it's this idea of fighting for your life and how we come to a time in our life, usually in middle age, but for some of us, it certainly comes sooner or later, where life has just dealt us enough that if we don't find a way to fight for the life we want to make, then we crumble under despair, regret, remorse, etc. So I think that's what the new book's going to be about, but we'll see. Yes, Sarah, celebrating is happening. Yes, Karen, celebrating creating videos and written materials every week for my business. Yay! Yay! I created my first meditation with background music this week. Yay! And I'm nearing the end of my first session of my seasonal. I had a tooth pulled on Friday and I have a little bit of a lisp when my tooth hurts that area. Nearing the end of my first session of my seasonal group program, and I've learned so much from just doing it. Yeah, doing it, right? That is our message here. Do it. You can't learn anything if we don't do it, Karen. That's amazing. And Megan celebrating being here. February was hard, and I'm glad March has arrived with new practices of walking and writing daily. Beautiful. And such a sense of springtime outside, right, Megan? She's a little bit north of me, about an hour north. And it is like we're having this incredibly weird sunny weather. Drizella, I'm in the midst of putting Post-it notes on boards, partly timeline, but a different iteration to pinpoint various story arcs, creative nonfiction. It helps me to see things anew. Yay for timelines. Yay for narrative arcs, which is a perfect transition for me to introduce Lisa. And then we'll have more time if you want to write in celebrations, y'all, while we're getting started, and I can read them at the end. One more, Shevin, I'm celebrating progress on my morning routine, empowering past the procrastination to begin again. I also want to celebrate feeling like I'm finding my tribe, especially my in-person writer friend who I met online through you, Jen. Yay! Meet up, use the Facebook group to meet each other. It's so good to be flesh to flesh. Okay, one more. Beth, I'm celebrating setting healthy boundaries around my time and energy that are also flexible. Oh, beautiful. 2 weeks ago, I wasn't up for a house guest, but today I'm well enough to host my mother. Oh, that's fantastic. I'm so glad, Beth, you're feeling better. That's great. All right, I'm gonna unmute our lovely guest. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, thrilling to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited here. Wait a minute, I have both of your books. Look, it's a double. It's a double. Yay. So I love these books, which is why you're our guest. Everyone is so excited that you're our guest. I'll give the quick bio. Lisa is a story coach and the author of Wired for Story and Story Genius, best writing book ever, and video tutorial. She's a new class on Creative Live where I did a 90-minute, yours is like 7 hours, right?
Yeah, it's long.
Yeah, it's a whole class and it takes you through this book. So if you learn better on video and audio, well, audio, obviously, video go together. That's a really good option, super affordable. And she also has a video tutorial, Writing Fundamentals, The Craft of Story at lynda.com. And we'll put the links when we put the recording up. She's worked in publishing at W.W. Norton, an agent at Angela Rinaldi Literary Agency, a producer on shows for Showtime and Court TV, a story consultant for Warner Brothers and the William Morris Agency. And since 2016, Lisa's been an instructor in the UCLA Extension Writers Program, which many, many years ago in the 80s I took classes in, and is on the faculty of the School of Visual Arts MFA program in New York City. Amazing. We're so happy to have you here.
You do that so well. It's like you could be a carnival barker.
You know, it's as my husband says, don't give her a stage, don't give her a mic.
I would go into any tent that you were pitching.
Come on in, come on down. Yeah, so I will read the comments for you. You know, don't worry about any of the technology. Tell me whatever you need. I'm here to support you.
Okay, yeah, and I'm kind of, because I do my best talking standing, so I can't get to any like keyboard or anything because people are saying hi in my head, but I can't type it.
Perfect. I will type anything you want me to type. I'll feed you questions. You take them.
Great. Okie dokie. So, and I'm going to actually put something right in front of the screen for me. So I just can't tell you guys how utterly happy I am to be here because there is nothing that I like better than being in a room full of writers, whether that is an analog room or a digital room as this one is. Because writers, you guys, you are the most powerful people on the planet. Why?
Oh, I love that.
And it is absolutely true because story is the most powerful communication tool in the world. We're biologically wired for story. We make sense of everything via story, via narrative. Story is actually hardwired into the architecture of your brain. You have the power to change how your reader sees the world, how they see themselves, what they go out and do in the world, simply by giving them a glimpse of life, letting them experience life through your protagonist's skin as you put her through that tough story problem. And that, I'm betting that maybe even by the end of today, is more power than you probably know that you have right now. But as with everything, there's a caveat, right? There's always a catch. And you have to have actually told a story. And that's my topic. My topic is always story. It's never writing per se, but it's story itself. And you might be thinking, wait a minute, didn't you just say we're wired for story, that it's, part of our standard operating equipment? We're born knowing story. Why do we need to talk about story? Why can't we talk about writing and writing techniques? And the answer is, as the great Southern writer Flannery O'Connor once quipped in an interview, she said, I find that most people know what a story is until they sit down to write one. And I can't tell you how true that is. I've spent my career working with novelists and screenwriters for more decades than I want to admit to being alive. In that time, I can't tell you how many manuscripts I've read where if you asked me, what's it about? I'd say, it's about 300 pages. I have no idea. It's just a bunch of things that happen. And so the question is, why? Why is that true, especially now when so many of us really are called to write and have stories to tell? And I think the answer is because everything you've been taught about writing is wrong. And I know that is a very strong statement. So let's break that down. First, when you decided you wanted to write, what was the first thing that kind of entered your mind and that other people would say to you? If you want to be a successful writer, your first goal is to learn how to write well. And that makes total sense. And I promise I'm not here to say, no, that's completely wrong. And let's spend the next half hour or so talking about how to write poorly, because that's your key to success. Of course, I'm not going to say that. But let's break it down a little bit further. Let's look at the usual suspects. When people think about writing well, it tends to mean I'm going to come up with an interesting premise. I'll come up with some kind of interesting character. I'm going to learn how to write a scene. I'll learn how to write really realistic sounding dialogue. I'm, of course, going to learn to write really beautiful, wonderful, luscious prose. I'll sprinkle in a lot of breathtaking metaphors. And then I'm going to sprinkle in on top of that a whole bunch of sensory details, because that's what they tell you brings a story to life. And when I've mastered all of that, when I've mastered all of those techniques and elements, then I'm going to unleash my creativity, and somehow, by magic, a story is going to appear. If I have the talent. Otherwise, I should probably give up and take up something like interpretive dance. Don't do that, because that is not the way that it works. Words and writing technique are the handmaiden of story, not the other way around. It is the story itself that gives those words their riveting power. In fact, there's only one thing that a story needs to do from the very first sentence, and that is it has to grab your reader. It has to instill the kind of curiosity that instills, that then triggers that sense of urgency that doesn't just make them want to know what happens next, but that makes them biologically have to know what happens next. Everything else is gravy. Now, I'm not saying that learning to write well isn't a good idea. Of course it is. But it comes second. Because if all you master is beautiful writing, beautifully written, storyless novels are what's known in the trade as a perfectly penned, who cares? A perfectly penned, so what? Beautifully written, storyless novels are about as engaging as a perfectly rendered bowl of waxed fruit, and as moving as a totally tricked out car with no engine. It just sits there idling, annoying everybody. Because if beautiful writing was what grabbed us, if we were hardwired to just search out and respond to beautiful writing, and what I used to say at this spot was, I'd say, would the Da Vinci Code really be the 8th best-selling novel of all time? And I don't say that anymore because, for one thing, it's not true. What I say now is, and I'm glad you're all sitting down, assuming I'm standing, but I'm assuming all of you are sitting down, is, would the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy really have sold 125 million copies 125 million copies. And to put that in context, that number is from June of 2015. That's before the movies came out. So it's probably a whole lot more, by now. I mean, to put that number to context, 125 million people is double the number of people that voted in the last election. That is a lot of people. And what does everybody say about those books? Poorly written by, writing well standards, and couldn't put it down. Even if half of the people put it down, that's still 62 million people. And it is really poorly written by good writing standards. I read it, and then Donald Moss and I did a 3-part blog post on the Writer Unboxed that was supposed to be 50 things that writers can learn from 50 Shades of Grey, but we got so carried away. I think we did a 3-part post and we got to 72 things, and then thought, hey, we've got lives, let's move on, and that was it. But it really was poorly written. I ran it through. You can do one of those, Amazon searches where you can see how often a word or a phrase is used in a book. The intrepid heroine, Anastasia Steele, says, holy crap, 40 times. That's 40 times in the first book alone. Holy crap is an expression you should only say once in your whole entire life. Mm-hmm. If you already said it, I don't care if you're on the playground in the 2nd grade, you've used your quota. You can't say it again. Mm. She says inner goddess so many times, if you used it for a drinking game, you'd be in rehab before you were halfway through the book. It really is poorly written. But 125 million people. So there are 2 ways to take that. The first is to go, okay, that's 125 million really stupid people, and I'm not writing for them. I don't quite know who that would leave, actually. And they weren't stupid. The second thing that you might think is, okay, well, wait a minute. What is it then? If we're wired for story, what is it that makes us think it's about beautiful writing? Why do we believe that if that isn't really what hooks us and rivets us? And the answer is, and it comes back to your brain, we're wired so that the first job of an effective story is to anesthetize the part of your brain that knows it is a story. Story really is the world's first virtual reality, and I know you know that feeling, right? You're reading a novel and you're exhausted, and you think, or a memoir, and you think, okay, wait, one more chapter, and I promise I'm going to go to bed. And then you read, and you get to that last page of the chapter, and it's a cliffhanger, and you think, okay, one more page, and then before you know it, you're thinking, wait, what happened? Did someone park a Mack truck outside my window and put the bright lights on? I'm going to call 311 and get that towed away. And that's when you realize that you stayed up all night. Mm-hmm. And then you remember what exhaustion is. I mean, literally, stories put your biology on hold, and you are lost in the world of the story. And when you're lost in the world of the story, the last thing that you can figure out, or want to figure out for that matter, is how the writer has created that sense of reality that you are walking around in. Mm. But there are 2 things you can see in that state. And the first one is the prose, the words on the page. And I'm sure you guys have had this experience. I know I have. You're reading a novel and you're just loving it. And you think, I love this writer. She's so funny, she's so wry, she's so insightful. I would read anything that she writes. And then you read a review of the book, and the reviewer has pulled out, one of those lovely, luscious sentences, and you read it and you swoon and you think, I want to be a writer. I have stories to tell. And in order to do that, I need to learn to write sentences like that, instead of, I need to learn to write the kind of story that would give sentences like that their power. The other thing that you can see is the plot. In fact, it's really interesting. They say of our 5 senses, sight is the most developed. I know you've probably heard, and I think it's true, that smell is the most evocative. You smell something, you're immediately there. But we rely on sight more than any other sense, so that it's very easy to then envision the plot. You're seeing what's happening, you're looking at the words, and you go, okay, I get it. In order to really write a riveting novel, I need to learn to write beautiful, lovely, luscious prose, and then come up with a plot, and then, if I have talent, a story will appear. And that's not how it works. It is not the prose, it is not the plot that grabs us when we're reading. It's the story. Which brings us to the question, okay, well, what is a story then for our purposes? What are we talking about? So I'm going to say it twice. And we try to say it slow. I know I talk fast. And then we'll break it down in familiar writing parlance. A story is about how what happens affects someone who's in pursuit of a deceptively difficult goal and how that person changes internally as a result. Let me say it again.
Okay, go slower though, I'm writing it.
Okay, good. Yeah. A story is about how what happens affects someone who's in pursuit of a deceptively difficult goal and how that person changes internally as a result.
Okay, got it.
Yay! I can't believe I can talk that slow.
I'm proud of you.
So let's break that down. When we say the story is about the plot, the first thing is it's about how what happens. That what happens is merely the surface of the story. Yes, that is the plot. And if I leave you guys with nothing, it would be this. Your story is not about the plot. The plot comes second. Story first, plot second. It is merely the surface of your story. It's why all those story structure books can lead you so far astray, because they focus solely on the structure of the plot. And that is not what you would do first, and that's not what's pulling the reader in. So it's about how what happens, that's the plot, affects someone. That someone is your protagonist. Your protagonist is your reader's avatar within the story. In fact, they've done fMRI studies that show when you're lost in a story, same areas of your brain light up that would light up if you were doing what the protagonist is doing. Your protagonist's brain is really the command center of your novel. And to kind of further prove that it's not the plot that gives you drama, it's how the plot affects the protagonist. Everything over there in your plot is going to get its meaning and emotional weight based on how it affects your protagonist, and not just affects her in general, like she hates the cold weather and it's snowing over there in the plot, so she's going to stay home and instead of going out and have cocoa for the evening. It's how what's happening in the plot affects her in pursuit of a deceptively difficult goal. That deceptively difficult goal is something that you might have heard referred of as several different things, either a plot problem, story question. It is a difficult thing that they need to tackle and do, that they've got no choice about. They cannot opt out of it. And it actually, we don't have time to go deeply into it, but it's got two layers. There's the external layer, the thing that's happening, and then there's the internal layer, what that plot is forcing them to deal with, which we will talk about, because stories are about change, and we don't change unless we're forced to. And here's something really interesting. Good change is just as hard as bad change. It is just as hard to leave home to get married as it is to leave home to get divorced. In fact, I think sometimes it's easier to get divorced. So stories is about a hard-won change. So it's how what happens, that's your plot, affects someone, that's your protagonist, who's in pursuit of a deceptively difficult goal, and I'm going to call that your story problem, and how that person, meaning your protagonist, changes internally as a result. And that, my friends, is what your story is actually about. In other words, your story is not about the plot. Your story is about how the plot affects the protagonist. Story is about a hard-won internal change, not an external change. And you might be thinking right now, wait a minute. You mean my protagonist has to change? Change from what to what? What are you talking about? Aha. All protagonists enter the story, step onto page one with two things already fully formed. And that is, they step onto the page already wanting something that they've wanted for a very long time, probably since late teens, early childhood, and a misbelief that's been holding them back, that is a misbelief about human nature. Again, something that comes into being very early in life, usually sometime in childhood or early teen years. And that misbelief has kept them from getting what they wanted until your plot is now going to shove them into the fray, and they're going to have to go after what they want. But in order to get it, they're going to have to confront and reevaluate their misbeliefs step by step by step by step. And all stories, again, that external plot problem is one problem that grows, escalates, and complicates. But that's not what your story's about. It's about how it's affecting your protagonist. And so that plot is making them struggle with this misbelief step by step by step by step. And that struggle between what they want and what they want to do and the misbelief holding them back is what I call your novel's third rail. That's where meaning comes from. Everything that happens in the plot is going to touch that, and it's going to bring your story forward from beginning to end. In fact, you often hear people talk about what is your novel's narrative thread. And it's very easy to mistake narrative thread for the plot. Well, that's my narrative thread. Not so. Narrative thread is your protagonist's internal struggle that is being challenged scene by scene by scene by scene. Now you might think, okay, so protagonist enters wanting something, and this misbelief thing, that sounds kind of familiar. Misbelief. Isn't that like a fatal flaw? You know, I've heard that the protagonists enter with a fatal flaw. And no, it is not the same thing. Fatal flaw, I kind of admit at one point, I think I used that term. I would never use it again. Fatal flaw, let's think about that. A fatal flaw. Doesn't that sound really judgmental? Doesn't that sound really finger waggy, you know, like you've got a flaw, like you're doing it on purpose, like it's actually some kind of moral failing. You know, you're doing it on purpose, and maybe my plot will disabuse you of that flaw, maybe not, let's see. In other words, your protagonist is sort of a reprobate. The other term that you might have heard that I think is a little bit closer is wound. Protagonist enters with a wound. I don't particularly like that terminology, again, because it's not neutral. A wound sounds like your protagonist, they went from being a reprobate to being a victim, you know, and now they're a victim, and maybe the plot will heal them, maybe not. Now, they might be both of those things, or either of them. But I think a better term is misbelief. So what is a misbelief? A misbelief is something that happens early in life, and it's something that in a normal childhood trauma, and we've all got them, and when I say childhood trauma, I don't mean like, you know, taken up by a spaceship or getting, you know, thrown in the trunk of a car and taken out in the desert, but a normal childhood trauma where we're trying to figure out how the world works. We go in expecting one thing, we're not treated the way that we think, that we expected to be, and we've now learned something about life, about human nature that we carry forward. Let me give you a quick example. Let's imagine that when the novel starts, your protagonist is going to be 29. But when she was 9, she grew up in a very dysfunctional family. Now, I always wonder, like, what is a functional family? I have absolutely no idea. But this is a very dysfunctional family. So she grows up in a dysfunctional family. Her mother, single mom, working all the time, rarely there because she's got to work so much. She's got feral brothers and sisters. She feels very, very alone. So she wants what we all want. She wants to be seen. She wants to be heard. She wants to feel like she's of value. So there's a group of girls at school, and they decide that they're going to form this club, and it's around this little Japanese anime character. And to be in the club, you have to bring in a little Japanese anime doll. That's when the club is going to start. And she loves this character, and she thinks, great, I will get this doll, I will join this group, and I will feel seen and heard. So she saves all her money for a long time because they don't have much money. And finally, the day before they're supposed to bring them to school, she's got enough. She opens her bank, and moths fly out. It's like, oh my God. So she is just bereft. At which point her older sister comes over and says, you know, I know you haven't told me anything about this, but I know you, and I've been watching you, and I care about you, and it tears my heart out to see you like this. I asked around school, I know about the doll, and I know your money's gone missing, and I couldn't stand for you to go tomorrow and not have the doll. So I took my own money and I bought you an even bigger doll. And at this moment, the protagonist is going, oh my gosh, I don't need those girls at school anymore. You know, you've seen me. I feel seen. I feel heard. I have to tell her. And she knew me down to my soul. This is wonderful. But then her sister says, but you know, I spent all my money on that, and I'm supposed to go out with Ralph tonight, and I'm supposed to pay, and Mom hasn't given me my allowance since I crashed the car, and you know that wasn't my fault, and she's got that $100 bill in her purse, and I know it's for food, but I'm not hungry, are you? And she likes you so much. You're so cute. If you could just go in and distract her for a minute, I could then go in and, now at that moment, now there's a big aha moment, right? Aha, the protagonist, who probably also looked into the past too, because this probably isn't the first time something like this has happened, is thinking, wait a minute, you didn't do that because you cared about me. You did that because you're trying to manipulate me into going and doing something wrong. You're trying to use me. Now, in that moment, that was adaptive behavior. And probably knowing that saved the protagonist from a lot of other similar situations growing up. But the misbelief that comes from that, the conclusion that that protagonist would draw would be, yeah, you know what? The more someone seems like they want to get to know you, the more they seem like they like you and care about you and can see you, the more they're just trying to use you. Now, out there in real life, away from that family, that is not true. But you can imagine how, having seen the world through that lens, that the nicer someone is, the more they're trying to use you, that is going to cause that character to misread people from that moment all the way up until she's 29. So that's what a misbelief is. It's a misbelief about human nature. And the thing about a misbelief is it feels very true. You feel very lucky to have grabbed onto that early in life, because you feel like that's going to save me from a lot of heartache down the line. And this is what we come for, this inside intel about how to navigate this mortal coil. What we don't come for is the surface, and the plot is the surface. And here's the thing, we understand how to live in the surface world. One of the things that I think every single one of us, Jen, you, me, all of us have 100% in common is that every single one of us has lived from birth up until this moment in the surface world, and we're here. So we've survived. We are all survivors. But we don't come to story for the surface world because we understand the surface world. We come to story for what goes on beneath the surface. I often think of story as the difference between what we say out loud and what we're really thinking when we say it. Because ask yourselves, how often is what you're saying out loud to someone and what you're really thinking the same thing? And which is more interesting? And which is juicier? And which is more revealing? What you're thinking. And isn't that what we want to know about everybody? What are you thinking? Is what I'm saying landing well? We want everybody to like us. And so we're constantly worried about that. You know, did what I say, did it offend you? Did it not? Did you think it was funny? Am I understanding what you're saying? It's funny when people talk about being insecure. We're all insecure. We have to be insecure because none of us are mind readers. And if we could read other people's minds and know what they thought about us, I think that'd be way worse.
Oh, God, it'd be awful.
We totally don't want to do that. But that's what we want. We want to know what people are thinking. It's like if someone comes up to you and goes, you know, Matilda, I'll love you forever. You know, what's your first thought after, my name is not Matilda? It's like, really? Can I trust you? Are you punking me? Are you, will you love me tomorrow? What? Mm-hmm. There's an expression that we've heard, and I would venture to say that every single one of you has heard this expression somewhere in your life, and it is, never let them see you sweat. Never let them see you sweat. What does that imply? It implies that we are all sweating buckets. That is what story is about, the things that we hide. I once had a student at UCLA who said, she said, I know on the surface I look put together. And she really did. She said, I know on the surface I look put together, but inside I'm a raging mess. And I'm trying to keep all of you from seeing it. Mm-hmm. That's what story's about. It's about the raging mess inside. And that's why I know, Jen, when I was looking at your website, you're talking about, it can really hurt to write and to dive down deep and be creative, because we got to be vulnerable, because that's what the reader comes for. They come for the stuff that we don't actually say out loud. Mm-hmm. They come for what we're really thinking. That's where the Me Too moments are. And that's what we come to story for. Oh my gosh, I thought I was the only person who looked at the world that way. I thought I was the only person who was nervous and scared in that way. I realized it's all of us. I realized that thing that I thought made me weak is actually what makes me strong and human. That's why writers are the most powerful people in the world, because we're willing to go there and we're willing to show what it's like in that on that plane that society tells us, yeah, don't go there. We go there. And that's why it hurts. If it doesn't hurt, my theory about almost everything in life is, if you're not at least a little bit scared of it, if it doesn't hurt just a little bit, you're probably not doing it right. It has to hurt. So let's go very quickly now. If you're writing something, whether you're just starting a new project right now, or you're in, as most writers tend to be, you're in the middle of a work in progress, or you're going on a third or fourth draft, let's talk about 5 questions that you can ask yourself. Now, I would say that if you're already working on something, put it in a file folder on the desktop of your head and leave it there. It won't go anywhere, I promise. But see if you can run it through these questions and if you can answer them. And Jen, just let me know, how much time do we have? I've actually got a clock here and I can look, and I want to be sure I don't.
Yeah, we usually have our guests go till maybe 10 of.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and you're so fabulous and everyone's having such a good time. Feel free to,
Okay, I'll just see if I'll just talk faster. No, just.
Okay. And then we have to have a little bit of time for questions. So maybe quarter of or 10 of, and then we get a few minutes for questions, because I have a really burning question I have to ask you.
Okay. So look, I will try to do this really fast then. The first question you want to ask yourself is, what is your point? What is your point? All stories make a point beginning on the very first page, and you need to know what it is before you can write forward. And when I say, what is your point? I mean, what are you saying about human nature? What inside intel are you giving us about human? Now, I don't mean, therefore, that you're then going to step in front in the first sentence, you're going to tell the reader that. But you need to know what point you're making so you can write a story that actually gets us there. And just as a little teaser for the last thing that you're going to ask, the 5th question is going to be, what is your protagonist's ultimate aha moment toward the end? And the way that your story makes its point is that scene by scene by scene by scene, your plot is going to force your protagonist to really grapple and finally see, hopefully, their misbelief for what it is. And that is where the aha moment comes in, and that is when your story makes its point. So you need to know what that point is, and you need to know, you cannot write forward to find it out. It would be sort of like, let's say, and I'm going to totally make this up, like you're taking a class on the use of nuclear energy in Spain. I have no idea if Spain even uses nuclear energy, but let's pretend it does. And so now you're writing the paper at the end, and you go, yeah, I'm writing my term paper, and I'm just going to throw in everything I know about nuclear energy and everything I know about Spain, especially bullfights, because they seem sort of cool, and I'll see where it takes me. Like, you would never do that. You would have a point you are making about nuclear energy in Spain, and then your story, your paper would build until it made that point. The same thing is true with a novel. And in the beginning, the point you're making can sound really super simple. It can be something like, being vulnerable and saying what you need is worth it, even if you don't get what you want, or something as simple as, it's what's inside that counts. But you need to know what that is. And again, just to say these 5 questions are things, I'm not suggesting you could answer them in a simple declarative sentence and then go, okay, now I'm ready to go forward. They're actually steps that you would be digging into, going further and further and further back. And, in the book Story Genius and my Creative Live class, we go into many more layers than this, but this is just down and dirty. So see if you can answer that question. What is your story's point? What inside intel are you giving us about human nature? The next question you want to ask yourself is, who is your protagonist? Because again, all stories, nobody ever says, hey, that movie you watched, whose plot is it? Like, no one says that unless it's maybe a movie about a graveyard. People say, hey, whose story is it? It's always one person's story. We don't have time to get into if you have dual protagonists. Really, almost always there's what I call an alpha protagonist. But when I ask you who's your protagonist, I don't mean who's your protagonist on page 1. I mean, who is your protagonist before the story starts? Who are they before they have any idea the dark and stormy night that you are about to shove them into? Because the truth is, all stories begin en medias res, which means in the middle of the thing. So page 1 of your novel is actually the second half of your story. The first half, and yes, I am talking about backstory, is the most fundamental layer of the story that you are going to write. And diving into it and creating it isn't pre-writing. It isn't what you do before you get to the real stuff. It is actual writing, because it will be in your novel on every single page, in the form of internal thought, in the form of flashbacks, in the form of dialogue, and in the form of literally what is going to happen. Because let's just take 1 second and do one exercise. I just want you guys to think this. Imagine the next year of your life starting tomorrow morning. Like today, we're standing right there. We're on the other side of that end media stress. Tomorrow morning to a year from now. Imagine everything that you're doing, that you're hoping is going to come to fruition. You're working hard on it. You're afraid it might not. There are probably awful things that you really don't want to have happen in that year, and you're working hard to have them not happen. And now filter in how your spouse is filtered into that year, and your kids or your parents or your dog or your boss. There's a lot there. Not only are there a lot of things that you think are going to happen, there's the emotional and psychological meaning that you read into it. Where did all that come from? All of those things that are going to happen to you. Are you going to wake up tomorrow morning and a blank slate and they just start? Of course not. You started them all over here in your past. And the same is true of your protagonists. They walk onto the page already fully formed. Why, when writers go, well, I'll get to know my protagonist as I write forward. Don't do that. She's already fully formed when she steps onto the page. So you want to ask yourself, who is she before the story starts? What does she want? What balls does she already have in play? What's she the most afraid of? Who is that person before they have a clue what you're about to do to them? The next question is, what does your protagonist enter the story already wanting? What does she want? Because that's what's going to set her agenda. And all not just protagonists, but all characters step onto the page with an agenda already fully formed. Every character has an agenda, and scene by scene by scene by scene in your story, they are trying to bring that agenda to fruition. So you need to know what it is. So, well, we don't have time to go deeply into it, but the questions you want to ask yourself about what your protagonist wants is, what do they want? It's something they have wanted for a long time. You might go, well, wait, my protagonist is going to want to get together with her roommate, and she's not going to meet him until this, chapter 2. So how could she want him already? Like, is she a psychic or something? How is she going to know that? The answer is, well, he personifies something in her life. There's something she's wanted that this guy is going to personify. What is that? Where did that come from? So ask yourself, what does your protagonist enter wanting? And then why do they want it? Because just what they want isn't enough. They want $1 million. Well, who doesn't? So it's, what does $1 million mean to them? Does it mean they've been put down? She's been put down her whole entire life. So if she gets enough money, she can say, there, you see, I'm worth something. Is it that she squandered somebody else's money and feels really guilty about it? She doesn't care about money at all now, but she wants to get the $1 million to give it back to that person. Why do they want it? What does your protagonist think getting it, achieving that goal is going to say about them, both to themselves and to the world at large? And then the question is, are they right? Is that what they really want? If we think about romantic comedies, almost always it's the person goes after the wrong person right up until the very end, and then they get it and they go, oh, wait a minute, well, what made me think I wanted that? I really want another person. So is it what they really want? And if not, what is it they really want? And here is the last thing I'll leave you with on that one. You have to know the answers to all of these questions before you start to write. You can't say, writers will go, well, my protagonist doesn't know what she wants. That's fine, but you have to know. Because otherwise, how can you write a story that forces her to see it or that gives it to her? You need to know all of this in detail, really, by writing scenes to figure it out. But anyway, so those are the questions you want to ask. Next question is, and luckily we've covered a lot of this already, is what is your protagonist's misbelief? Because that is what has been holding your protagonist back probably from very early in life. I know in the Story Genius Workshop that we have a Facebook page, and writers will go, oh my gosh, I was looking for my protagonist's misbelief and I found my own. One person said, oh my gosh, now when I ever meet a new person, I think, I wonder what their misbelief is. The truth is we all have them, and we have lots of them. What you're looking for is that central misbelief. Like what we were talking about, the girl who thought, okay, the nicer someone is to me, the more they're trying to use me. And you want to figure out what that is and really write what I would call their origin scene, where that belief came from, which was like that story that I told you earlier. And then you would really track how that had steered their lives toward what it is that you want to have happen within the novel itself. Because misbeliefs don't stay static. They pick up other supporting misbeliefs along the way. So you would figure that out. Because again, that's what your plot is created to disabuse your protagonist of. So the fifth thing that you would ask yourself, and there are many other questions because we don't have time to talk about where does your novel start and what would that plot problem be. Otherwise, we would spend too much time on that. So let's leap to the last thing we're going to talk about today, which is what will your protagonist's aha moment be at the end of the story. Now, an aha moment what the aha moment is, it doesn't necessarily come at the very end. It's when they really see their misbelief for what it is. It's something that has been holding them back. And that comes usually in the last 20% of a novel, sometimes at the very end, sometimes, 20% before it ends. It is that realization that often allows them to then solve the story problem or come to grips with it because they feel differently about it. And what looked like a problem before suddenly isn't a problem to them. It's that moment where I love T.S. Eliot says, the end of our journey will be to arrive at where we started and to see the place for the first time. That's what that aha moment is. Or as Proust said, the only true voyage of discovery isn't in having new landscapes, but in having new eyes. So in other words, if you don't know where your story's headed, what it is that your protagonist needs to realize, how can you possibly create a plot that's going to force them to actually have those new eyes and what those new eyes are going to see? When you try to figure this one out, this is the hardest one to do because you haven't written the novel yet, right? So you don't actually know. The only thing I would say, and I think I'm doing pretty good with time, so the last thing I would say, I'm going to actually bring it in at the time that you said almost, is just when you say, what do they realize? It's not just that you want to know what that aha is. You want to have some idea what it is that leads them to it. In other words, the logic, the thing that happened that made them suddenly have that aha moment. It isn't just, oh my gosh, I suddenly realized I was wrong. We don't come for the what in story ever. We come for the why. Story is not about what happens. It's about why it happens. It's not about what someone does. It's about why they do it. If I leave you with nothing, let it be that. Always ask why of everything. So those are the 5 things that you can ask now to see if if what you're writing now, if you can answer those things in depth. If not, stop and go back and try. And if you're doing something new, this is great because it really lets you know what you need to know in order to create a story. Because a story isn't about beautiful writing. It isn't about a plot.
Lisa, you just froze.
Oh, really?
Oh, no, now you're back.
Oh, yay. So technology, like I said, technology is our friend until it's not.
Well, it actually might be my technology. So I'm going to just close a couple windows and make sure that nothing is making my technology unstable. So wait a minute. Can you just reiterate the 5 questions? Because I was writing them. Oh, wait, Heidi just wrote them down. Never mind. Perfect. Heidi, thank you. You're such a better scribe than I am.
Yeah, and thank you. I meant to say it when I started, and I totally forgot to.
Well, I started writing them, and then I started not getting caught up in what you were saying. But Heidi, I'm gonna copy what you wrote, Heidi, and share it with everybody. So we have a couple questions.
Yay, I love questions. That's my favorite part.
And I'm gonna cheat and I'll try to ask mine first. Although of course now it's like I should have written it down because I'm like I got totally caught up in what you were saying. But when you were talking about, I understand now more deeply than I have what story is versus plot. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I really have struggled with in my own writing and in teaching writers is making sure that there's actually action happening, that it's not all state of mind, because a lot of the writers I work with are like, let's just have it all happen in our head, especially when we're writing memoir. And I could kind of hear that as a possible opening in what you were saying, that there wouldn't be any plot.
Right. No. And of course there is. I mean, it
Yeah.
really, if we had time, it's something happens and it forces the protagonist to struggle with what to do internally. And then they take action. And you're right. The art of writing is the balance between those two things, because you never want someone to like go down memory lane because it feels so good, or to think about things that don't pertain to what's happening in the moment. But something happens and we're forced to make a tough decision that, we don't want people to know what we're really thinking. And the clock is ticking for us. And so that's where that internal thought comes in. And what the hell do I do at this moment? What should I do? What's the right thing to do? And then we take that action. And of course, everything we do to make it better tends to only make it worse.
Right. And forces us to in
Right.
against our misbelief again and again.
Yeah. I mean, and I would say, it's funny, I was working with a client who said, she said, I wanted to see that internality. She said, so she's reading, Gillian Flynn, who wrote Gone Girl, and she was reading her first novel, which is called Sharp Objects. And she said, I took a highlighter and I wanted to see how much of it was backstory and that internality that you're talking about. She said, I'm halfway through the book and I've highlighted 60, that's 60%. This is really what it is that's pulling us in if it's done well. That's why writers will often tell you not to, don't give us backstory. Don't only give it when the reader needs to know it. Never give us backstory for the reader. You're giving us backstory because the protagonist or the POV character needs to think about it in the moment, because that's how they got to figure out what the heck to do.
That's brilliant. That is so brilliant. So the way that I've always said it is give us backstory if it moves the story forward.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I mean, it does move the story forward,
Right.
But it's on the story level, not the plot level.
Right, exactly. It's on that internal level, and that's where it comes from. And start watching, because you'll see it. I mean, in other words, it's done all the time. We don't notice it. Writers do it so stealthily that we literally don't see how often we're in someone else's head. We don't see how often. That's exactly, I'm reading right now, just because I try to read from every genre. I'm reading Hunger Games. And it's all, talk about a back and forth between exciting things happening and how Katniss is making sense of it. It's all that back, forth, back, forth, back, forth.
Right. So Serena asked the balance between what? And the balance between action and what I would say state of mind, or thinking, processing, deciding. That was the difference. Okay, several people have asked lots of questions. I'm going to try to get through them. One is, how does this apply to memoir?
It's exactly the same.
It is.
It could not be more the same. It is exactly the same. Because when we come to memoir, we come to every story hardwired to ask, and this is us as readers, what am I going to learn here to make it through, that will help me make it through the night? What am I going to learn that's going to give me insight into the human condition and into how I can live my life better, give me more insight into how we treat each other, which means that with memoir, it is the exact same thing. You figure out, what is that misbelief that you came in with? How is that going to be, is going to play out via the things that you are going to have happen. And the problem, with memoir is you have so much to choose from. And so it's great because you got so much to choose from. And it's hard because you've got so much to choose from. Right. You also have to let yourself be vulnerable. Because the other thing to realize, and all writers have this problem, is that readers read at their own pleasure. They don't know you, especially with memoir. It can be really hard to hear. So even though you've been through something really rough, they don't care. That sounds awful, but they just don't care. What makes them care is that you're vulnerable and there's something at stake, and they want to go through and see what's going to happen, and there's something that you need to learn. There's something that you are struggling with, and you're courageous enough to let us see that. If it's just a hardship that's happening to you, we're going to bail. One of the hardest things back when I was working with Angela at the Angela Rinaldi agency, and it was right when I can't remember if it was I think the first Iraq War, and we would get lots of proposals of women whose sons had been killed in Iraq, and it was so hard to have to write a rejection letter like, I'm so sorry for your loss, but there's no story here. There's no, it's just a thing that happened. So we're looking for that inner transformation always. If there's not an inner transformation, we're not going to go there.
Yeah, perfect. Great. I'm going to go to Lucy's question. My protagonist is born at the beginning of the story. How would you rephrase the question? Who is my protagonist before page 1? Right. And I have your book, Story Genius, and it's awesome.
Thank you. Now that is a really good question. And I mean, it depends on what you're writing about, because I would guess that obviously you're not going to write this is what happened, on the first day, and then next week they did this, and you're going to just like track their entire life. So because you know where that's going, you know what that story question is going to be, and I'm assuming you know what the misbelief or kind of what that internal journey your character is going to go toward. I would look at that and then see how does what happened, from birth up until that moment create that. Is what I think you can still find that origin scene moment because they're still struggling with something. But you're right, that's a great question. That's a really good question. I never asked that question before.
It's a really, really good answer. Jamie asked, how do you apply this amazing story model to inspirational nonfiction or self-help? Can there be multiple problems solved throughout the book, like one per chapter? Is there only supposed to be one problem? And can there be one main story problem with lots of smaller story problems?
I think it depends on if you're talking about, let's stick with self-help.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that Mike, if it's one thing you're going forward with and you got to do all of these steps to get there, it's probably better if there's one story going through and we're watching one person. But that doesn't mean that there can't be other smaller, examples that just focus in on whatever that chapter would be. But again, this same model of taking us inside and showing us why a character is doing what they're doing, and then showing how whatever whatever type of self-help you're talking about has helped this person go through, that you would need in order to really, I think, teach any kind of self-help. I think all of it comes from, I want to see it. I want to see it from someone who wasn't working in, and now I want to see it work going through. Because that's how we learn. That's what teaches us. Telling us doesn't. You tell me how to do something, and my analytic brain comes up, and it's like its goal is to poke holes in everything that you say. Because if you're trying to give me self-help, you're telling me I'm doing something wrong, and nobody wants to hear they're doing something wrong. So people fight against that. If you take us into someone else's skin who we're empathizing with, who feels like us, like, oh my God, that's my problem too, and we watch them go through it, we're going to come out the other end already believing what you're trying to tell us. I mean, that's advertisers. Advertisers tend to know that more than novelists and televangelists and politicians. They're real good at that.
One of the ways that I use your model for self-help is to think about your one reader and then create their backstory. What are they grappling with that brought them to the bookstore or Amazon to search for the book? Like, write that backstory, before they come searching, describe their life, describe what's hurting them, what's been there for so long.
And why it matters to them. That's the key thing. Why it matters
to them. And what do they want? What's the misbelief that you're going to help them turn around, and you can weave in story with information and exercises, and that's the most effective. And if you read books like Tara Brach's Radical Acceptance, if you read the Heath brothers, do a great job of that.
They're so good.
Yeah, you can start to look for models of story plus information.
Yeah, Heath Brothers is great. Made to Stick, which I think is a fabulous book. They have different stories all the way through, but they're also looking at different studies, and so there couldn't be one story that goes all the way through that one. That's a fabulous book.
Yeah. Okay, a couple more questions. Joyce wants to know, can you start a novel and not know the ending right away?
I wouldn't. No, I don't think that's a good idea. How do you know where you're going then? How do you know the point that you're making? I mean, it doesn't mean if you know it that inherently, everything's written in stone and now that's what you have to do. But yeah, no, I would not write forward not knowing. I would really try to figure that out. Again, it's a marker in the stand. It's not as if you absolutely have to have it go that way. But otherwise, and writers will do this all the time, if they don't know where they're going and they don't know what point they're making, and you can start with a lot of like steam and it's great, and then you get that feeling where suddenly you don't know what happens next. Like you literally don't know. And it's, you know, it's like, do I go right? Do I go left? And that's when writers start really focusing on the prose because that's sort of all they've got. And then that's how you end up with a novel. It's a bunch of things that happen. And I think it accounts for that statistic that you know, of 100 people who sit down to write a novel, only 3 are going to finish a first draft. 97 people are going to hit. And I think a lot of them hit that place where they don't know what. I've worked with a lot of writers who go, yeah, I get about 30,000 words and then I'm lost because they had no idea where they were going. They weren't going anywhere. They were just sort of seeing where they're going. And that's not a story.
Elise wanted to know, do each of your characters need a misbelief? Because won't the other characters be two-dimensional if not?
Yes, and here's the thing. Yeah, because what you want to do is your protagonist, it's your protagonist's story. Every other character is there to either make it harder, make it easier, is to support that story. But each of those characters is going to believe they're the protagonist. Every character in your novel thinks they're the protagonist, because the same way we all think that we're the protagonist in everybody's life around us, and we're only the protagonist in our life. But what you would want to do is create that character and whatever their misbelief is, so that it does what you need for it to do to the protagonist story. But that said, it doesn't make them mechanical, because you want to pull them out, and you know what? You will develop them not as deeply as a protagonist per se, but almost, so that you could plunk them out and they could be the protagonist of their own novel if you so decided. But that's how you create secondary characters. And the other thing to think of, just really quickly, is, as I said, every character steps onto the page with a story-long agenda. And in every single scene, those characters are trying to bring their specific agenda forward. And so if you know what that is, and I think that's the brilliance of it, and before you write a scene, you go, okay, in their agenda, this person is trying to make this happen because they've got that agenda, you know, then you'll know exactly who's going to do what, who believes what, what's going to happen in the scene, what often happens. And you're right, if you don't do that, those characters just kind of do whatever that particular scene needs them to do. And then they become not only two-dimensional, but they become, wait a minute, the person who did that on page 20 would never do that thing over there on page 50. Like, why would they do it? And then, you know, it all falls apart. So the answer is yes.
Okay, I have a question. So one of the things that I see with the writers I work with is sometimes we don't have enough confidence in our ability to just generate words. And so we want to develop that habit, which is great. Yeah. But then that becomes just generating words at some point, and we don't know how to make the leap to thinking about story this way. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's kind of building a bridge between maybe what Natalie Goldberg would do, you know, in writing practice.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with writers who are like, okay, I've been filling writing practice notebooks for 10 years. Right. It's like, and they want more, right? That's not enough for them, but they don't know how to make the bridge to this kind of story thinking.
I mean, honestly, I mean, that's what I wrote Story Genius for. That's what I did the Creative Life for, because it does start with that. Here's what a story is. Here, from that first glimmer of an idea, here's what you can do. And to me, that's the best way of really doing it. Because otherwise you do just end up, I do think, and this is an awful thing, I know. I am one of those people, I'm surprised no one set my hair on fire already. I do think writing's taught wrong everywhere. I don't think it's about technique. I don't think you give someone a premise and then they start writing forward, because why would any of it matter? Premises tend to be just some big weird thing that happens. Why would it matter to anybody? And I don't mean anybody, but a particular person. So I think that, in other words, people, when they go, oh, just start writing, it's like saying, I'm going to write a 300-page novel about the most important turning point in somebody's life who I know absolutely nothing about. Like, why would you do it? It doesn't even make any sense. So, I mean, that's why I think coming in and answering these questions and doing these, you know, going back and writing, say, an origin scene. Where did the misbelief come from? Really learning what a scene is. And again, not a scene separately, because people will do scenes and they go, well, move the scenes around and see how it fits together. And you go, if you can do that, you don't have a story, because a story is cause and effect. So, but it's really understanding that internal change. That in fact, I mean, it's funny that you'd ask that, Jen, because on one level, I don't get people quite at that place, but I get people who've written novels who don't know they're at that place, but that's where they are. It's like a bunch of things that happen. And I find when I have them go back and get to the place where, okay, here's this origin scene, you know, go and write it. And here's what you write. That's when they actually learn how to write, because they learn how to give us context. They learn that you have to let us know what a character expects as they go in. They learn how to do the internality. They learn how in every scene you write, your character changes a little bit. In every scene you write, they draw some conclusion that changes things and moves it forward.
Or but it can also move them backwards, right?
Yeah. And when I say forward, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I don't mean that it's always like they're constantly going in one direction. Right. I mean, the story goes forward, but yes, absolutely. They could take a giant step backwards. Right. They can go off a cliff. Absolutely 100%. In fact, often if you look at romantic comedies, they're almost always somebody going backwards because they're doing something against their self-interest until they finally get the person who we the viewer have known since the credits they didn't belong.
Right. And the fun is watching them figure it out. Exactly. Okay, that's a great answer. And so I just want to say for those of you, I know we're on all different levels and we're working on all different projects. And I think the leap that we decide whether we want to make or not, and I've been talking to this in different settings that I teach in, it's kind of the leap from writing is very mystical, which it is at times, and you really do, like, where the hell did that come from? To like putting the mystical aside for a while and getting really like the planning brain. And I know that freaks some of you out because like, oh my God, I'll just go down the planning hole and I'll never write anything. So it's about balancing it and creating, not like, and one of the things that Lisa says, it's not writing everything about the character and filling notebooks.
Don't do that. Right. It's not, if I could just say, it's not about planning. It's about creating the material from which the story is going to come.
Oh, that's great. That's brilliant.
Build the story. It's not planning. It's literally creating that. So now you have the material from which the story will be built. Otherwise, like I say, you come in with a blank slate. And it's like if the story is about how somebody solves a problem and you start on page 1, what problem? How can you write about someone solving a problem you don't even know what it is? It doesn't make any sense. And I think, I'm sort of the opposite of the mystical part of it I don't kind of go in that direction. I think it's actually our cognitive unconscious. I think that's where they talk about 10,000 hours. I think the people who are really good writers with this come in with some of that already pre-programmed, like Steve, for instance, how he does what he does. But then some of his stuff is boring, for sure. It's like, I'm not spending, 40 pages in a painting with somebody. I'm sorry, I can't go there. But but at the end of the day, it's creating, it's not, and here's the one thing I would love, if I could just say one last thing, which is, I know, and I saw on your website, and it's so true, there are a lot of people who don't understand the creative process and don't understand about writing. And, you'll say, hey, I'm writing a novel. And then like 2 weeks later, they go, so how's that novel coming? Who's going to publish it? When's it coming out? And you're thinking, I want to kill you. And I never told you. And those are civilians. They don't get it. They don't get it at all. So if you do have the courage to go and really plumb this backstory and really write it again in scene form, and again, there's way more in Story Genius and on the, anyway, to really dive into scenes. And if those civilians come up to you and they go, so like, how far are you in your novel? Because you've already trained them not to say, when's it coming out? You can say, well, I've written 50 pages. They don't have to know that you haven't written page 1 technically yet, but they can just know, you're doing all this work. They don't know the difference. Civilians, they don't know. They really, best advice, don't tell them. They're only going to ask those kind of questions that make your head explode. Like, you want to write more? Well, I think really all you need to do is learn to type faster.
Oh my God. Or people come to my retreats and then people at home are like, they'll come home and people will be like, so did you finish it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a week. Oh, sure, I finished it.
Yeah. They think, and the irony is, they think they're being supportive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are. They do. Or sometimes they think they're being supportive.
Yeah.
Well, tons of great comments in the chat of, could you come back? You're amazing. Love this. So just really wonderful and incredibly useful. And
Thank you. I love talking story. I love the questions. They're my favorite. I mean, it's so fun to really get to dive into people's stories. Because again, the stories in the specific, not in the general, but all you can talk when you're giving a talk is in general. So getting to go back and forth with people is the funnest part, I think.
Yeah, it is. It is for me too. And one last thing, Drizella said, I'm writing creative nonfiction biography. This only works so far, but it is great. Would you have any comments for biography?
I mean, yeah, I would look as much as you, because you're right. I mean, you're just writing a biography, so it kind of is everything. I would look at the point even that you're making in the biography, the point in the person's life. And if in that biography, you can give us internality, we're not just watching from the outside on a screen. I would give us that so we get the internal struggle. Think of it this way. In life, anything that we do costs us something. If it doesn't cost us something, then we're lying about it. And that's what story is, a cost-benefit analysis of taking a particular course of action. So if that character is going to do something really, or per character, everybody's a character to me, you want to give us what it costs. I would just refer you to the thing that flashed into my mind was if you watched The Crown, I'm
finishing season 2. Don't tell me what happens. We'll kind of know what happens.
Season 1. And if you look at, forgetting even her, I think it's the 8th episode, the one that is on why is my mind, Gary Oldman just won for playing him. Who do I mean?
Oh yeah.
Got it.
Yes. Not Gary Oldman, but Gary Oldman in the movie. Got it.
Right, Winston. And if you think about the scene, and I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a scene where he's had this guy's doing a painting of him, and this thing comes out about his daughter having drowned in the estate where they live, and you realize in the way that it's said that marked him, that was an origin for him, that he became the person who he was because of that, and that's kind of what's driven him from that moment on. So the more in a biography you can find those moments, and whether you can put us thoughts in the person's head, or you as the writer can have insight into why they did what they did, that will give you this. So it's not just, I remember when I used to read for William Morris, and sometimes you'd read biographies and you'd find like somebody would get the most arcane itty bitty details about someone's life, like the pattern of the china that their mother had. And then they put that in 3 times because they dug so hard to get the information. You're thinking, I don't care. It just doesn't matter. Why are you telling me this? So any internality and any of the internal human why is what we always want to know.
Great. Okay, one more question. First, everyone wants best contact information. It's your website, correct?
Yes.
And that's lisacron.com, right?
No, it's Wired for Story.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
One last question. How do you feel about outlining? I have found it history too long to report. That lasted far too long before actually writing. I would really like to know when you feel you are ready to just go, just write, just let it go.
I think here, and I agree with you, because outlining tends to be outlining the plot, and it's a waste of time. Don't do it. I think what you want to do is you want to dig into all of this so that you've got the backstory, which is the first half of the story, which will then catapult into the novel itself. And then you're ready to start writing. Now, I have what I call story cards that do go 1 to 1 to 1 that let you really plan out what's going to be in every scene, so you're sure it's part of that inherent cause and effect trajectory of your novel. But yeah, no, don't outline it all the way to the end. When I said leap to, what that aha moment is, once you've done that, then you can come back to page 1 and you can start going forward. Absolutely, yeah. Doesn't mean that you don't have some idea of what might be happening further on, and you wouldn't keep track of that and maybe even already have that in your head. But yeah, outline, because outlining tends to be outlining the plot. That's why story structure books will lead you so deeply astray. It's like they will take apart movies that you've already seen. So you are supplying the human internality of it. So it's easy to go, this has to happen at this time, and then page 20, that has to happen, and then we need some reversal over here, and we need... And so you're writing toward that, in other words, towards big plot things happening, as opposed to what would actually organically happen in the story itself. And so you're going to some grab bag of objective, exciting things to move the story forward, as opposed to looking in your story's backyard, because the answer is always there. The answer is always there in your story's backyard, not in some, random grab bag of, and now a bomb falls on downtown Cleveland.
I really, really, really swear the last question. Have you ever had input from an agent or editors that was detrimental to your creative process?
Me? Good question. God, no, I don't think so. No, I've had help. The people I've worked with have been fabulous. I mean, I have a book coach myself, Jenny Nash. She's for nonfiction. She is the best. She's like, see, I don't know how she does what she does. So she's my book coach, and she's never given me bad advice. And my editor at 10 Speed also has been real. The copy editors sometimes. I use the word since, meaning because, and there was another word that she just changed them all to the technical term. And I said, oh, we got to put all these back. And we did. But yeah, no, I've not gotten bad advice. I would say with fiction, that's way more likely. Let me ask you another. I've seen fiction editors give people super bad advice. So yeah, fiction is different. Fiction editors often can tell you that something isn't working, but they can't really pinpoint why.
It's hard.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's easy, but I think it's because people don't go down to this level of story at the end of the day. So yeah, it is hard.
Well, this was fantastic. Everybody wants you to come back. You're brilliant. We'll email, and I'm so grateful for your way of seeing things and how well you can language this other level.
Yeah, I mean, this is story. This is because people. Okay, I'll shut up. I'm shutting up.
No, you can keep going. We're gonna end after everyone's applauding. They love your books. They're thankful you're here.
No, it's just that people say you can't write beautiful until you get all this. That's the problem. What stops a lot of writers is they think you got to write pretty from page one without having anything to write about. I mean, language is just a conveyor of information. I mean, that's what it is. And if you don't have what it is you're trying to convey, how can you write something that's beautiful or lyrical or anything? You got to have something to say first. And then I think the story polishes the prose. And I think story structure is the byproduct of a story well told, not something from the outside. Anyway, okay, now
I do too. I think story structure is still worth studying, but it's very different to look at it when you have the sort of the way you're thinking of it, because then you're like, it can help you see and think about how the organic unfolding. It's another way, like when the Flannery O'Connor quote, which is like, sometimes you can't see it till you study it.
Yeah, I would think my caveat would be, once you've written something, then you can take a look at that and see how does this measure up? Does it need to be more exciting here? What might I be missing? Once you've got this first part, so you know what your story is and kind of what your protagonist is going to be struggling with, because that Visa or MasterCard or whatever commercial it was, the one thing we never do leave home without is the way that we see the world. Your protagonist has that from the very beginning, and what they've created in the world's already there. So once you've got that, yeah, I totally see that you could do it, as long as you know that when you're looking at that structure, again, you're not looking to pull something out of an external.
Right. Yes, you can't do that. You can't do that. It never works. And it's the high concept screenplays that were so hot in the 80s. When I was a reader at CAA and went to USC Film School and all that. So yeah, cool. All right, fantastic, everybody. I'm so glad you got so much out of this. We've gone a little long, so we're not going to do our goals for the next month. But if you want to come on Facebook or on our forum and declare them, I will totally cheer you on. And just so much goodness. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you. This is really fun. I love doing this. This was fun.
Yeah, you can tell. And if there's more questions that you have, I can try to answer them on Facebook or point you to some resources. Totally recommend, of course, the book. And if you want to spend just a little bit more money, the Creative Live Workshop is great. If you learn well video, then do that. Yeah, so everybody's just so happy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Right,
Okay.
everybody.
Bye, guys.
So, bye. And everybody, if you we'll put the replay up probably tomorrow. And just so grateful for all of our new members, and what a great way to kick it off.
Yay.
All right. Yay. Okay, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
I'm going to save the chat. Bye.
Bye.